It's fair to say that most NASCAR drivers, even the ones we really don't like, are exceptionally talented individuals whose abilities we greatly respect. But, at the end of the day, despite their superhuman talents, NASCAR drivers are still just that. Humans. Humans who make mistakes, blunders, failures, and sometimes downright stupid decisions. And so, I have devised a list of the stupidest moments in NASCAR history, and for the purposes of this video, I've split them out into 4 distinct categories. We'll start with the simplest category, boneheaded wrecks. If there's one thing that every driver should be aware of, it's NASCAR's cardinal sin, the right hook. Right hooking another driver in the wall is basically like writing an invitation to the guy to come clobber you in the face after the wreck. And in more recent history, it more often than not earns you a 1-week trip to the beach while everyone else is still out there racing. Perhaps one of these stupidest right-hooking moments came just a couple of years ago at Las Vegas in 2022. This was during the height of the next-gen car safety controversies, as driver Alex Bowman had just been sidelined due to a concussion he sustained at Texas. And 2311 driver Kurt Busch had to tearfully announce his retirement from full-time racing after his concussion from Pocono. Since Kurt had already qualified for the Owners' Playoffs though with his win at Kansas, Bubba Wallace temporarily switched rides to the 45 car to earn the team as many points as possible. But only 95 laps into the Las Vegas race, Kyle Larson would make incidental contact with Bubba coming off of turn 4, which prompted Bubba to chase Larson all the way across the track and right hook him into the wall. Right hooks already aren't that great of a look, but when you're driving the race car of your injured teammate who just had to retire for safety reasons, that makes this right hook look significantly stupider than any that had come before it. On top of that, Christopher Bell, an innocent bystander and Toyota teammate, nearly had his playoff hopes ruined by this crash. Luckily, he dug himself out of the hole with a clutch win at Martinsville 2 weeks later, but in the moment, this crash just looked bad from every angle. And after the fallout from this wreck, which resulted in Bubba Wallace's suspension, the next right hook looks just as stupid, with Chase Elliott doing the exact same move to Denny Hamlin in the 2023 Coke 600. Hamlin was extremely quick to note the similarities in the two incidents and called for Chase Elliott's suspension the next week at Gateway. A suspension that NASCAR had pretty much forced themselves to make given the precedent they set at Vegas a few months earlier. So it's a bit hard to say which of these two is the stupider right hook. Bubba for doing it in his teammate's car during a safety crisis, or Chase Elliott for doing it while likely knowing he'd be suspended in a year where he desperately needed points to make the playoffs, which ultimately he did not. So who's dumb and who's dumber? I'll let you decide. Although this next dumb wreck isn't an explicit right hook like the previous two, the wreck still involves a suspension and actually started with a right hook earlier that season. Enter the incident that permanently tainted Kyle Busch's image for many, Texas 2011. But before we analyze the actual wreck and why it's stupid, we have to rewind a bit. Like I said, this whole ordeal started with another right hook, which took place at Darlington earlier that season when Kyle Busch hooked Kevin Harvick into the wall. Surprisingly, Busch suffered no consequences for this wreck, but it was in the middle of NASCAR's have-at-it boys era. An era that would come to an end much quicker than anybody expected. Busch was fined and put on probation for pushing Harvick's car out of the way on pit road, however. But this set the stage for a season-long battle between Kyle Busch and everybody within Kevin Harvick's inner circle. Whether it was Harvick punching him on pit road, Sadler wrecking Busch at Bristol, Busch getting into Joey Coulter and then getting into Richard Childress' headlock, it seemed like everyone in the KHI and Childress circle had it out for Kyle Busch. And finally, this organizational feud would come to a boiling point at Texas when Kyle Busch blatantly wrecked KHI driver and championship contender Ron Hornaday under the yellow flag following light contact between the two earlier that lap. To call it an overreaction on Kyle's part would be the understatement of the century. Here you have a Cup driver, not even eligible for Truck Series points, taking out all his frustrations in a guy racing for his own title. And not only did Busch destroy his own truck in the process, but he also got himself parked for both the Xfinity and Cup races that weekend. Of all the controversial moves in Kyle Busch's career, this was by far the dirtiest and probably the stupidest. And with this penalty being handed down by NASCAR, it marked the formal end of the boys have at it era. Moving into our second section, failed paybacks, this one is pretty self-explanatory. If you're gonna get payback, get it good. Don't waste your only opportunity. Of course, the poster child for this category has to be none other than Danica Patrick, who entered her own day at Kansas after attempting to retaliate against Landon Castle, leading to Landon's incredibly memorable quote,
"Well, rule number one of stock car racing is learn how to wreck someone without wrecking yourself."
But don't worry, Danica, while you may be the most infamous for it, you're not alone in this category, because it also includes a 7-time champion, Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy was always known as a calm, collected dude who never went after anybody. Well, except for one time. Richmond in 2011, the only time in NASCAR history that Jimmy Johnson retaliated. And you could tell it was the only time because he was not very good at it. Much like Danica, Jimmy ultimately sent himself to the garage with his retaliation, while Kurt Busch was able to continue on in the race. Not a very effective maneuver. The last example of this may very well be the worst one though, and oddly enough, like the previous two, it's also from 2011. Man, people were really not good at payback in this season. But honestly, it wasn't just payback that Brian Vickers was bad at on this day in Martinsville. He was bad at pretty much everything. Bro managed to cause at least half a dozen cautions on this day, and pretty much had half the population of Martinsville wanting to fight him at one point or another, including Matt Kenseth, who was known for being one of the least confrontational guys possible. And so, when Brian Vickers tried to pay Kenseth back, for a wreck that was already his own fault, he ultimately ended his own day, much like Jimmy and Danica. But hey, we did get one of Jimmy Spencer's greatest NASCAR Race Hub rants out of it.
What most owners are going to look at is we took a torn-up race car and drove all the way to 7th before I was wrecked by Matt Kenseth, which is more impressive than anything. Is he kidding, Steve? He's saying I had 5 incidents in one race, finished 30th, and for that, you should hire me. I'll tell you exactly what we can do, Burns. We give Brian Vickers his brand new putter award, because if there's one thing I know, he sure ain't no driver. Let me tell you something. I raced against Matt Kenseth. He's one of the cleanest drivers out there. He's not going to spin someone out unless that guy really has it coming.
Huh. Ominous foreshadowing there. Next, we have pit road fails, notably anyone who ever tries to pit from the top lane, like Quinn Houff attempted a few years back. But honestly, that didn't end half as bad as when JJ Yaley, ever so faily, decided on a whim that he would try and kill Mark Martin at Charlotte in 2006, as he came all the way across the racetrack when he realized that he was running out of gas, effectively ending Mark Martin's championship hopes for the year. Even the commentators were baffled at just how stupid this move was. It's like something they teach you not to do in NASCAR kindergarten. But entering pit road is one issue, leaving is another. And nobody has cemented themselves in the dishonorable mentions record book harder than Kevin LePage in that department, who decided to merge onto the racetrack at Talladega in 2008, effectively wrecking nearly the entire field and turning Carl Edwards into an astronaut in the process. I mean, even the NASCAR video games penalize you for merging before the backstretch. How the heck does a guy older than dirt like Kevin LePage just forget the rules? Honestly, this is a solid contender for the #1 dumbest moment of them all, but we still have one section remaining, throwing away a win. And for our first example, it's one that I debated putting in the pit road section, but it definitely qualifies for this one as well. Mark Martin pits from the lead with 1 lap remaining in the 1994 Busch race at Bristol. Back in the day when races could end prematurely due to the yellow flag, they would often run multiple caution laps until the checkered flag actually fell. Mark Martin must have lost track of the laps in his head though, as he pulled off the racetrack before he had actually reached the checkered flag, all while smiling and waving to the fans. Mark even said in his post-race interview, "I don't understand how anybody could be that stupid." And yes, while this is a monumentally stupid move on his part, at the very least, he was apparently having radio troubles throughout the race, so it's possible he didn't hear his spotter or crew chief telling him to stay out. But still, I think I'd stay out there until there's literally nobody else. I don't know if anybody else has ever thrown away a win quite as badly as that, but there are a couple guys who threw away much more than just a win. Welcome back to the list, Jimmy Johnson, and his move at the end of the 2018 Bank of America Roval 400. While it was extremely hype and is still the reel that the Roval uses till this day for promotional material, it is undoubtedly stupid. Johnson was comfortably into the round of 12 at this point in the race, but him going for the victory and spinning out ultimately resulted in him getting eliminated from the very first round of that year's playoffs. I know, NASCAR drivers are creatures of habit and have been trained to ruthlessly go for the win at all costs these days, but the risk-reward factor was so stacked against Jimmy here, I'm genuinely shocked that he went for it at all. It just goes to show, points racing is still important at the end of the day. But you know what? In fairness to Jimmy, he hadn't won all season long, he probably wasn't mounting a championship run anyway, he had a reason to at least go for it. The same cannot be said for Joey Logano at Kansas in 2015. Logano had already won an advance to the round of 8, and bear in mind, this was before the advent of playoff points. There was literally no reason to ruffle any feathers in pursuit of another win. But Joey was stubborn, and he wanted that trophy more than he wanted common sense. And by spinning Matt Kenseth for the win that day, Joey created the one weapon strong enough to defeat himself. Following Matt's elimination from the playoffs, it looked like Joey was cruising to an easy win and Final Four berth at Martinsville, when the guy that he had wronged just so happened to creep up on him at the worst possible time. Without Logano's greed getting the best of him at Kansas, he likely wins this race and mounts a championship-winning run. But one horribly stupid decision had his entire season head straight for the fence. So which of these do you think is the stupidest moment in NASCAR history? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.